I want to welcome today Vicki, Peterson, Cowsill of the Bangles and other groups as well. As we talk to her today, she's joined us here at North White High School for our 1980s History of Rock and Roll and Garage Band. Joining us today, I have Leander Hoover, music teacher, Sean Curtis, and
I'm a garage band class now?
Yep.
Exactly. For what?
I'm going to let Leander get it started here.
Sure. Vicki, thank you for joining us. Can you please walk us through the early parts of your life musically? Did you piano lessons? Were you in band and choir, orchestra? The early music part of your life, please.
I started out early. I talked my parents into buying me an electric guitar when I was 9. Before that, they had bought me a series of plastic guitars from Sears. I finally got a grown-up guitar in the 4th grade. I was so excited. I took about 3 months of guitar lessons and kind of went, yeah, I don't think so. And I started having songs. So I went straight to that. I should have stuck to the lesson. I'd probably be a better guitar player. But moving on to, I wrote songs with a kid all the time. And by the time I got to high school, I did sing in choir. Actually, one of my favorite high school experiences was singing in the a cappella choir. It was a very independent group. 16 voices and all a cappella, and that was a blast singing madrigals and old, really old choral music. I love singing choral music. So that was a big part of my development as well, which I think kind of bled into working on vocal harmonies later in the band. I did a lot of choral singing.
Well, I'd like to welcome back my old colleague here, Mr. Curtis. And Mr. Curtis, what questions do you have for her to start?
Oh, so many. Okay, hold on. Let me take a breath. I'm not going to fanboy all over you, but I probably will. So I also don't know how much Todd told you, but I also run with my students. And did we talk about the 1988 project, Todd?
Yes, I mentioned it a little too.
Yeah, we run the 1988 project, which is looking at how 1988 has influenced the entire history of the modern world by giving us like a break between the Cold War world and the millennial world, and just, everything from the rise of mass terrorism to the end of Reagan to the Russians retreating. And obviously for the Bangles, an important year too, because it was the last album you produced before you guys kind of left us for a decade. So I've been watching lots of interviews. I know, killed me. I've been watching lots of the interviews just to get my mind wrapped around, because I had seen an LA Times article about, it was always the same questions they asked all of you. And so I was watching, I don't know if you remember the Joan Rivers interview from her late night show where she called you the Beatles. And so I guess my first question was, did you find there was a difference in questions that women interviewers would ask you and men interviewers would ask you? Because I find a lot of it was always like, who are you dating? She even asked you which one of you slept with Prince. It's pretty bold. So did you find there was a difference, or did they all pretty much treat you all the same? Like they call you female rock band rather than just rock band.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't know that I've ever really noticed the difference between male and female interviewers, but I think it's easy to make a case that we were asked different questions than, say, U2 was asked, or even Flock of Seagulls. Yes, they ask the same questions over and over again, and it is exhausting to answer even name questions. And just doing press tours in general, which we do a lot of, I found to be just sort of emotionally draining.
Actually, that's part of what I saw. I was going to actually ask you that. It looks like, and I may be wrong, before every interview, it looks like you're all sitting there, and then oftentimes they break you up into pairs. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you and your sister, and then, Suzanne and Mickey would talk. But it always looks like you guys took a deep breath before you went out, said, here come the questions about who we're dating again. Here come the questions about, do we compete with one another? And it literally looks like you all chose who was going to screw with the interviewer more than anyone else. Like between you and Mickey, I'd say between the two of you, you had a competition going to see who could screw with their heads the most. Am I wrong?
No, you are not wrong. We took turns, but yeah, Michael and I think probably landed the snarkiest.
Vicki, my question for you here too is looking at influence. One of the articles I read, they always talked about women. Did they play their instruments? Did you take the women band serious? You start with the Runaways in the '70s, but through the '80s we saw Blondie, Pat Benatar, the Go-Go's, and then the Bangles. So, what are some of your thoughts on the early influences of women bands on you as you guys came along? I know you started in '81, but you really worked to popularity around '85.
Right. Well, my sister and I actually started before that. We were playing in a band in high school with my best girlfriend as a bass player, and sometimes my on and off boyfriend as a guitar player. But we realized we did better just women. And so the idea that women can't play instruments never made sense to me, because I didn't understand why that would be an issue on any level. And I was influenced, I think, as a child, much more by all boy bands, like the Byrds and Rolling Stones, vocally bands like the Moms and Papas and the Beach Boys, and just vocally in tuned bands that way. But so it wasn't really so much seeing other women rockers and going, hey, I want to do that too. I actually cried when I first read about the Runaways. The first article in the LA Times, because I was their age and they got there first. And I was just like, I was crushed. But then I also realized that they were put together by a man who was sort of putting his vision on this band. Later, I think the women definitely took control, and I've known Joan and Lita and several of the band members from the Runaways over the years, but and have a lot of respect for them. But that was a whole different thing. And then once we started playing past 1981, when Jen and I met Susanna, and we started up with that group, there were several other female bands playing, but really the Go-Go's were way ahead of us as far as getting good. They already went to England. They came back. They did a single. So it was fun to watch them take off like that. And they made a really good record. A classic.
Well, I mean, I guess on that, did it help to have Mickey/Michael in the group, since she'd been in the band, like she knew kind of what people were doing to female bands? Did that help to have her guidance in the band?
No, actually, I think it was the opposite. We tried to get Mickey in the band more than once, and she was like, I never want to play with an all-girl band again. I don't know if your students know, but Michael Steele of the Bangles, bass player, was the first lead singer of the Runaways.
Right.
And it didn't last long. She realized what was happening and was not cool with it at all. But and it really soured her on the entire experience. So we had to kind of ice her back. And she said, no, that's going to be fun. It's pretty fun.
I'm going to go back to the starting a band. Can you talk about how you get a band started, knowing when it's time for you to leave, your job is done, moving on, character traits of successful bands, emotion, just the beginning stages, not the popularity, but the beginning stages of a band.
Which is more important, in a way, the most important thing. You just mentioned, like, you could teach an entire semester on just those subjects you just mentioned. Because putting a band together and figuring out who works and who doesn't work is one of the toughest things. You can find a bunch of people to play with. There are people who want to play. And you can, if you're lucky, you'll find people who are actually simpatico with you as far as what kind of music you like, if you're lucky. But finding people that you actually want to hang out with, like a lot, that's a little more difficult. I mean, we used to joke that the Bangles was a four-headed marriage, and it really was, because in those 9 years, we lived together, we traveled together, we worked together almost nonstop, and leaving very little room for any other kind of life. So it's a big deal, but like you said, forget the success part, or when you're actually even touring, just putting a band together and figuring out who works. So much of it is non-scientific and just a gut level, and I recently been looking back on when we were in high school and we had a friend who was in the band. She was a friend, but she wasn't particularly musically adept. She didn't really want to work or rehearse, and we eventually had to let her go. It's the hardest thing to do for me. Maybe other people are more listening. It's easier, right? They probably be better at it. But that was important for me, figuring out, who's, like you said, who stays, who goes, and why. Because ultimately, a band is chemistry.
Yep.
If it's going to work and if it's going to go big, it's because you have something that's magical, and you can't quantify that, really.
Well, I'm going to jump in here on the next question. Obviously, one of the things we talk a lot of in the 80s, our 80s class, is MTV. We've had Mark and Alan visit with it for 7 years and just to hear their stories. But here was now the medium of putting musicians on TV. And I know you came into the latter part, but how did MTV help the Bangles' career? And you yourself?
Yeah, obviously hugely. It was funny when it first started. There was this little backlash in Los Angeles, anyway. A lot of musicians going, what's this? We don't need a video. My own videos in my mind when I listen to music. I don't want to watch somebody who just so hilarious about it. But,
Why, I believe those videos will kill the radio star.
Why, it just might. Or it might make more stars. So by the time we were signed to Columbia Records, making a video was not, there was no option. You were going to make a video, and you were going to pay for it too. The band paid for at least half of every video I do. Some of those budgets, like, you could probably buy a small house. But it became fun, but it was definitely a part of the job that, when I was in 11th grade, I didn't think about. I certainly wasn't thinking about, like, wow, 14-hour shoots, in a freezing cold warehouse in London before getting on a plane to go to Germany. Getting up at 4 in the morning to do breakfast, you don't realize some of the stuff. It can be really great, and there are a multitude of artists today who make art, with their videos. And Beyonce, look at what Lady Gaga does. I mean, there's just, it's completely, it's a new form of art. With MTV, because that was the only place where you would go to see a video. It was hugely important to get on and to get your video played.
And let me follow up with the question here, then we'll go to Sean next. Making a video, fun, not fun? Because was there ones that were more fun than others?
It was fun and not fun, absolutely. And there were some that were more fun than others. There were a couple that were nightmarish, like hence the one I talked about, the freezing warehouse at, at 3 in the morning before catching a red-eye flight. There was In Your Room was a fun one, I thought. We did all those little vignettes.
It was like Laugh It.
It was, thank you. It was. It was wacky, and it was really fun. Manic Monday was fun because it was really the first, high-budget video that we did. We did one for Real World off of our EP before we were signed to a major label. That was a blast because we just literally ran all over Los Angeles and did guerrilla shooting. There were no permits, there was no lighting crew or anything. We started at dawn and shot all day, and it was a blast.
Sean, go ahead.
Oh, see, all right, so, I'm going to contain myself again because I was listening to my vinyl copy of Everything last night from childhood, and I was really trying to listen to it for a couple questions that I wanted to have about that I always kind of had about it. Well, first of all, such a great transitional record between, like, say, Pet Sounds and the 90s rock that I grew up in. So I was born in 77. So, naive kid who listened to Manic Monday didn't understand what the making the noise up in the bedroom was or what in my room was. I thought, hey, I was playing Star Wars in my room. Maybe that's what they're doing. Same thing. The abortion theme of Dirty Dancing went over my head too as a kid. So, but as I was listening to it, I was thinking there's just something about this, and it's not, the Eternal Flame and In My Room aside, that when it's the other songs on it that didn't get airplay that really just had kind of this, I don't know, original sound that I was like, I know this, but it's 90s garage band rock. And I thought that was so cool because then I was watching the interviews, and I think it was you, and I don't remember who you're talking to, it was either Entertainment Weekly or you said, I want to bring back the electric guitar. And that's what we're going to do. And you seemed kind of embarrassed about it because I thought about it. I'm like, oh my God, everything was synthesizers, and the Bangles weren't synthesizers. Like, why I love the riff in Hazy Shade of Winter. You know? And I know you could say Simon and Garfunkel wrote it, but you owned it. They didn't own it, you guys.
And Paul played it on a 12-string. So.
Right, and no song ever makes me want to go out and just do stuff like Hazy Shade of Winter, like, you know? But you had said, we want to bring back electric guitar, and I thought that was so cool because it's 88, and then you guys vanished, but in 88, Nirvana started playing in clubs. So here you were, like, inventing grunge rock, and then you left. And so my thought was, did you guys ever think, let's go back, because here we are. This is what we invented. This is our sound, and now it's everywhere. But you left all through it, and then back at the end, when they put Bubblegum Pop back in the air. Did you ever feel like we've got to get in this? Like we invented this. Let's get back. This is us. We're finally arrived. But now it's all these other bands doing it.
Well, we didn't invent it. I wish we did. But we definitely, and we still to this day refer to ourselves as a garage band because that's kind of the basis of our sound. Just kind of plow through songs and I don't know if it was Everything or or Different Light. There was one record that we, how they made records in the 80s was you'd be all in a room, at least we did. We would all be in a room and track together as a band, 4 of us, live. And then systematically, these pieces were replaced, note by note, bit by bit, like every whack of the snare is now triggered and made sure it's, it was like, it became this mechanized animal that wasn't, what sounded like when we played the rough track, it sounded like the Rolling Stones. And it's like, this is a rock band. It sounds great. But now it's going to sound like this, which and that sort of mentality and that methodology continued, again, not so much in the 90s, but definitely in the 2000s, 2010, where, you're going Pro Tools and you are cutting every single kick and snare hit
right.
through a timeline. But yes, the grunge music movement was dear to my heart. The bands in 1990 were in no condition to be going. We needed that break that we took. I was against it. You notice in the early times when we talked about the breakup, I didn't want it. I wasn't done. But it was the right thing to do. It absolutely was the right thing to take that break. Definitely. And yeah, so huge Nirvana fan myself, and the whole Seattle thing, because that made sense to me. The electric guitars and voices. I mean, electric guitars, drums, and harmonies. That's the Bangles.
Well, I mean, just listening to you play on Watching the Sky, and I was like, I would put this up against what Bon Jovi was playing at that time any day, and it would kick down Bon Jovi because it was so. Your guitar kicks and the riffs on that are amazing. And going out, but Watching the Sky killed me last night. I was like, still great.
Sean, that was a great reference and a compliment saying Bangles and Vicki started this and then stopped, quit, moved on to other things, and then Nirvana picked up. Great compliment right there. Talking about Nirvana, garage bands, they're synonymous with power chords. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned this earlier before we started recording. I am not discrediting any of your musicianship. But can you talk about how easy power chords are? Many of the Bangles songs could be played with power chords, but what you might have done that took it the next step, especially like the riff, how important that riff is with a simple 3-chord song.
Sure. Hugely important because you're making music, and yeah, you can play 8 notes, downstrokes, any chord, bar chords up and down the neck. You've got a song. You're the Ramones. It's perfect, and it can rock. But to add depth to that, you go inside the chord. I realized that I have a tendency, apparently, to not do a lot of fancy fret work, but but find melodies inside the chord. And I think I used that a lot in the Bangles. It was pointed out to me by a producer friend years later. I was like, oh, I guess I do that. But parts is something, and when you first put the band together, you kind of have to think about that too. Like, what? You're not just all playing the same chord. That's making a sound, but the sound could be much more, have more depth and interest by adding guitar riffs or bass riffs, or hey, let's say the bass player just pedals on one note, and everyone else is changing chords with basses and page chords. There are ways to just add flavor and spice, and it's something I you have to learn that because you're starting, which figuring it out.
We were talking about depth, and I would use the word texture, same idea.
Mm-hmm.
But can you just real quickly talk about the harmony that you and the Bangles, your sister, had, and maybe I find it very unique. You brought up some great points earlier about how that is different than other harmony we hear.
Yeah, that was something that I was insistent upon from day one with the Bangles, and luckily, the first time Debbie and I sat down with Susanna, we sang a song together, and I just went, whoa, there's a sound there. That's really interesting. We sounded good together, and we were talking earlier about the sibling blend, as I call it. Just being in a family member, you're genetically very close, but it's not the same voice. It's not the same thing as stacking your own voice in a harmony on a track, multiple track, because it does this different thing, and it creates another overtone or another harmonic of some sort. But it's magical. And we listen to, like I said, the Beach Boys, the Cowsills, the Jackson 5, a lot of just family bands that sing together, and that harmony it's just magical. It's one of my favorite sounds.
Thank you.
Vicki, I want to bring something back from the 80s that I really stress with the kids is what we call musical activism. You had Band-Aid, you had USA for Africa, Live Aid, Farm Aid with Mellencamp, especially here in Indiana, Hands Across America, Sun City. And we're looking at the 60s had their climate, and now we're having a climate today. How important is the role of music in activism?
Oh, I think it's hugely important. It's definitely a decision that you make. Do I want to be an artist and be an activist? There's so many opportunities, especially today, and especially right now, this weird year that we're having, because there's opportunities online galore. I mean, just you can't watch everything that's out there, and but to be involved in a concert that's raising money for a good cause, it's always a beautiful blend of music and soul and humanity. I think I used to wonder, like, where are the protest songs? Because stuff's going on, people here. Where are the protest songs? And let's stir it up. And it's definitely out there.
Do you wish the Bangles during that time could have played at Live Aid?
Oh yes. Oh, yeah. We were making a record. We were in the studio in Los Angeles. I remember watching the show on the television, in the lounge of the studio,
I've always wanted, in this pursuit we've been doing, I've always wanted to find someone who sang on the USA for Africa or was at Live Aid, because I just think it's so powerful for the kids to understand what happened during that time in the 80s and how music all came together during that time. Sean?
I mean, gosh, you guys opened for Queen on their last tour, right? You were there for Freddie Mercury's last stand, so close to being alive as you can. So I guess kind of the question. Go ahead.
I was just saying that was a classic performance. Watching Freddie Mercury, watching that band.
It's just, I guess, kind of that whole feeling of that era. You guys saw so much, did so much, broke through so much. And what Todd was saying about pop culture today, and what you were saying about there's so many options. In my own mind, though, with so many options, it seems really hard to find a common cultural idea anymore. Like, we used to all watch the same TV shows. We used to listen to the same music. How does an artist break through today and stand out when people are on 1,000 different streaming networks and 1,000 different ways of listening to music? How do we find that commonality again?
I think it's really, really difficult. I mean, there's, every now and then something's going to catch and, go viral, and then go cross platforms. But it's very difficult. And on one level, you can look at it like, well, it's a positive thing because there's something out there for everybody. And, you can, hey, check out this TikTok and check this out. And, you can share things with your friends so easily. And I can record a song right now and have it up on, Bandcamp in, 20 minutes, or do a YouTube video myself here, which we've done, which I've done with my husband, which is pretty fun. But that doesn't mean anyone's going to see it, really. And it would be, I think, advantageous to have some kind of common platform, or someplace where people fall in to look at something and listen. But I don't know that that's possible right now. I just don't. I just think we're kind of too. You're going to share what you like with your friends, and you're all going to see the same stuff. But that doesn't mean that the guy 2 towns over is watching.
Great, thank you. So we've got students that we've asked for questions, and I have 2 young children myself. And the first song I always reference with you, the Bangles, was "Walk Like an Egyptian." They hear it for 20 seconds, they get a groove, they see the video. The first thing they always say, the elephant in the room they're waiting to say is, "Why Egyptians? Why walk like an Egyptian?" And then sometimes they say, "Seriously? Like you could have wrote about anything." Can you talk about, this is a question from Gabe, why you wrote a song, "Walk Like an Egyptian"?
Well, the easy answer is we didn't write it.
Okay.
It was written by a brilliant songwriter named Liam Sternberg. He's a very unusual creature, as you can tell by the song. And I don't know if in any of your English classes that you guys are ever looking at To Kill a Mockingbird, but there is a scene in that movie where Scout says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Walking like an Egyptian." And that's exactly what he was doing. And I don't know if that was the impetus for the song. I think what Liam has said, he was watching people, he was in Europe, he was watching people get off the ferry. And they were just kind of shuffling their feet like that. And it made him think of the tomb paintings and
Sure.
there. So it shows you how creative people are. It's a wacky thing. It was the 80s. And look at it like this. It was a cultural thing. Like it was just completely out there. But it was fun. And I had some divided thoughts about that song because I was like the electric guitar garage band kind of guy, but I realized we would never write anything like this. It is really fun. The label will never have the guts to release it because it's too weird. If they do, it'll go, which it did. And my whole goal was to make a dance craze. Maybe moderately successful.
You succeeded.
I really wanted it to be like, it's like a twist. It's like what you see, let's do something like that. So it was just fun and silly, and I think the country just needed at that moment in time some silliness, kind of like.
Yeah,
That's it was the 80s, right? They released Whip It for Devo, so.
Yep.
that's great that you can find inspiration or the writer anywhere. You said the shuffling. I think that's very important. I did not know that story. So talking about Walk Like an Egyptian, can you talk about the tambourine or the shakur at the beginning, the importance of live? Now we're talking live or maybe in the studio. The tempo, it's got to be right there. Everybody's got to be clicked in. You don't just guess and start shaking. How important is it to be locked in musically?
That was actually the first song that we ever recorded with a drum machine, and we actually performed it in the early days with a old school Lynn drum machine that you could go, but that early, that initial shaker sound that you hear, it was created with these crazy looking Mexican shakers. They were actually wooden or gourds, maybe, shakers in it was like a devil face. It was really frightening, freaky and frightening. But that's what we used to start that, and created a loop, and then put that loop. So yes, tempo and feel are everything. With that song especially, because you can get lost. If you don't have a countdown going on in that song, you're going to get lost, which did happen a couple of times. One memorable time when a friend who had a little bit too much to drink was dancing crazy in the wings and hit the drum machine and stopped the program. And we're like,
Yep. Yep, that's good.
more fun to play it live. You don't have to worry about being a slave.
Vicki, I want to ask you too about Manic Monday. That's the first song I remember of the Bangles when I was in high school, and it was written by Christopher, but we all know that was the name behind Prince. Talk about working with Prince, who he was, and the influence he had on your band.
He was almost like one of our little patron saints who just sort of float in and out of our world, and every time he did something magical happened. Like the day we got the cassette. They may have just described it cassette Teddy Goats to your students. With that song on it, a demo that he had recorded. Of course, it was fully fleshed out. It was a demo because he's Prince. And he said to us, "Well, if you want to just record the vocals over this and use the demo, that would be great." And we're like, "Yeah, thanks, but no, we're gonna cut our own track. But thanks." He would just show up magically, like sometimes at a show, you turn around and you almost finish the show, your tour manager is waving like crazy from the wings and going, like, hey. It was, you never know when he was going to show up, and then he would just disappear. He was just like this little magical creature that way. But yeah, he gave us a great song. He was writing under the name Christopher because he was in the middle of promoting a movie, and his character was named Christopher, and he decided that. So that's when, and it was very poorly kept secret. But we're always grateful to him for many reasons. But just a consummate musician was. He breathed and drank music 24/7.
Sean?
So, yeah, I was, again, going back to everything on the album, again, for my 1988 stuff, is that, it makes me sad that you left after that, right in the middle. I mean, Lilith Fair was built for you guys.
I know.
And you do it till 2010. I went to see it in 99 in Baltimore. There was an interview that I found particularly interesting, again, in a barrage of stream of questions. Who are you dating? What are you wearing? Do you fight with one another? You had just, I forget how many platinums did you get off your albums? I mean, you guys multi-platinum. And I think everything was probably your fourth album, right? Third or fourth album?
Yeah,
and they were still questioning your validity.
Yes.
And Michael says in that interview, and I'm going to quote her on this, she said, this album, everything is going to prove that we're not just a novelty act. Is that, I mean, do you feel like everything proved your novelty act? Do you feel like you had to prove that you were a novelty act at that point? That's kind of sad. And is that part of the stress that led to you guys just calling it, because no matter what you did, people weren't giving you the credit you deserved? I mean, do you feel like everything was the answer to that, or was everything the end of that?
I feel like everything in some way was more like our. It was not. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. We were actually very strained at that time. We had been coming off of years of constant touring. We had a small break before we started recording now. Make that record. We did work with David Sigerson, who is a phenomenal musician and a very sweet soul. So he was the right guy to take that project on for us. And yeah, every time we hit the stage, we were proving ourselves. Every time we put out a record, we were proving ourselves. And I don't know why. It seems so crazy now, because nobody would think, oh, she's a woman, she can't play. And I remember at the time, and I probably even said it in one of those interviews you read, like, one day we won't be asking these questions. One day it will be a non-issue. And that's what I was waiting for. And I think we're at that moment now. It's a non-issue. Nobody cares, what your gender is at all. And, you know, and thank God for that. It's just, it took us a long time to get there. And we struggled with it. And it was a lot of stress because you never felt appreciated. Or if you did, it was for the wrong reason. Or people were trying to put you in boxes, you know, like, oh, she's the little one, she's the lead singer, she's the, you know, oh, she's the tall one, or she's the, you know, whatever. It did create stress, and it's just stupid. Ultimately, it's just stupid.
Sure. This is my last question. I want to thank you for your time. What advice would you have for somebody in, I'll say Indiana, but more like closer to my heart, Monon, Indiana? Literally, the school is surrounded by cornfields. They might have a little punk garage band, three or four friends. What advice would you have for them today and maybe in a year of their musicianship? Like, what should they be doing today and what striving for a year goal?
Right. I'll give advice that I didn't take myself, but I say really master your instrument so that you're really comfortable with it, and don't get too hung up on, this may sound contradictory, but don't get too hung up on fundamentals and everything, so that, like, oh, no, this is in this key, so I can't play this note, because you probably can play that note, and just keep it musical, but really get comfortable on your instrument, so that A, nobody can tell you that you don't know how to play it, and B, you can then swim a little bit and find what feels good, what sounds good to you. You can play with other people, especially if you're kind of in a community that's limited, you don't have a lot of options for people to play with. You know, we have the internet now, and you can actually, obviously we're having a conversation miles apart. You can work together. It's hard to rehearse with Skype because there's latency, but it's been done. And just figure out what you want and really listen to your gut. When it comes to actually trying to put a band together, I think that's always, it's kind of a tough thing to do, because if something isn't working out, it's hard to make that call. But really just follow your gut, but get your instrument together, or several instruments. You know, learn how to sing. Be a singer, even if you're not going to be the lead singer.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
My question to you here too, Vicki, as we move along, let's talk a little bit about where you are now. 20 years, the Psycho Sisters, and now Action Skulls. Talk about some of the projects you're working on now as you continue forward.
Well, everything is just, things just kind of come sometimes into my universe, and sometimes I'm fighting against them, but it's always a good thing when it happens. The Psycho Sisters, they mentioned it, was a project that I started with Susan Cowsill, who's now my real sister in life. So she's the sister of my husband. We started singing together and writing songs back in the early 90s, and actually just right after the Bangles took their break. And we found, interestingly, that when we sing together, we who are not blood related have that blend. And we will actually go back and listen to old recordings and go, wait, is that you singing that or me? I don't remember. Are you singing the lead on this? Because we can't tell. Because we just found this crazy way to sing together. And that's such a joy. So we did some work together, and then fast forward 20 years, we finally put a record out. It's a little embarrassing. But I think that's a world record, perhaps. But that's a project that's near and dear to my heart. I moved to New Orleans in the 90s and spent most of the 90s there, and worked with a collective called the Continental Drifters. And this was my kind of take a deep breath and just relax moment, because our music was more Americana. It's actually the beginning of Americana to a degree. You know, bands like Wilco, you know, were our best friends, and hung out with them, Cowboy now. But really to me, you know, learning about and singing them Carson songs, and you know, just bird songs and Sweetheart of the Rodeo, and that's all this was stuff that was coming into my world and felt just comfortable and lovely. And that's a band that I'm still in love with to this day. I'm in love with every single member in that band, and it was just a wonderful balm to my soul, that experience. And now I'm playing in these interesting permutations of bands with my husband, John Cowsill, Bill Mummy, who's a friend, and iconic child actor. You've seen him if you've seen anything from 1961.
Put him in the cornfield. You guys ever tease him? Do you ever think he's going to snap you his fingers and put you in the cornfield?
We use that phrase all the time. It's like, okay, I'm gonna try this guitar part. We can put it in the cornfield, you know.
I have it on my door when they leave. It's him pointing. It says this way to the cornfield. Out on my door as you leave my classroom. You guys, well, with that, have you guys ever done a cover with him? Are you going to do a cover of Fish Heads?
He's got that pup.
It's like a rock version of Fish Head, break it out on stage.
He's such what a musician, though. And we've done, like I said, we put out an album called A Different World in March this year, which is kind of bluegrass flavored.
Nice.
That left turn for me musically, and John and I sang harmonies all over that thing, and it was that was a blast. And now we're 90% finished with our second album, the album that was supposed to be the follow-up to our debut album from 2017, but just didn't finish it. And then Bill came out with all these songs, and we just went, okay, let's just get this out now because we're all in quarantine. Let's talk about this moment because it's of that theme. The whole record is. So that was really fun. And so we're finishing up that record, and then John and I are starting another record that we're kind of just toying around with the songs on that one now.
Sean, I'll let you get the final question in, then I'll wrap it up.
Well, I have so many of them, but I can give you a choice of questions. First of all, I'm wondering if you would play the riff from Hazy Shade of Winter for me, but that's up to you. I see the guitar behind you. And that's just, again, me. And I told Todd about it too. It's my top 5 guitar riffs in music history. I mean, I wrote it out at Creep, Aerosmith Dream On, Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirits, and Eye of the Tiger or Helter Skelter. And right at the top of all that is that riff. And, oh my gosh, Hazy Shade of Winter. If you'd play it, I would melt. But
We usually start with that song these days.
So my questions, I'll just give you a choice here. In those interviews, they talk about, Susanna talks about how you had the movie Hard Day's Night memorized as a Beatles fan. So
I did.
Wondering if you still have that memorized. She mentions how she was in love with Bill Mummy as a kid, and I wondered if you ever introduced him and Suzanne. But on a more serious note, if you want to answer this one, I think your last performance together was Saturday Night Live that year in 1988 with Danny DeVito as host. So what is it like to play together the last time? And then what is it like to play together again the first time, I guess, with that gap? Because I think about all the bands I love. You guys had bands because the Beatles will never play again. Nirvana will never play again. Right. But, that first episode of Gilmore Girls that you guys played, my wife and I were like, yes! Drink coffee like a Gilmore Girl. I got the chance to see you guys play together, and I saw you in concert again, and I'm so grateful for that. What is that like, that gap? Last concert, Saturday Night Live, first concert back on stage together.
Well, I remember the first appearance that we made, kind of interestingly enough, in 1999 was at the Hollywood Bowl, and it was opening night at the Hollywood Bowl, and it's George Martin, the LA Philharmonic, and we were doing Beatles music, and we were invited to sing, and it was like, okay, we're starting here. This is like already a career ride to stand around a piano with George Martin over harmonies. That was kind of crazy. That was one of the first times we got back together and were standing on a stage together in years. We had gotten into the studio. Before that, we recorded a track for The Spy Who Shagged Me, the Austin Powers film, and added a song to that soundtrack because Susanna was sleeping with the director. Okay, they were married, you guys. So we had an end to that film project. And that was really fun. My concern about working with the Bangles again, because I felt like I needed years of therapy to get back into that world, but after having my break in New Orleans, but I was just really concerned that we were going to be a functioning unit and songwriting and being a real band and not just going out on 80s reunion tours. So that was my call, and that's what we did. And we made 2 wonderful albums, I think, in the 21st century, and which are both coming out on vinyl. You'll be happy to know, I think. I think by record.
That's 12%.
Yes. So yeah, it's definitely better, but it's also more more scattered just because we have lives and we're grown-ups, and we have grown kids and many other projects going on. So.
Well, Vicki, I really appreciate this from us here in education, joining us here at North Y, because this has been a passionate endeavor for myself, for Sean, for Leander joining us. Anything you want to say to the students here as we, a final thought to them?
Well, as I was saying earlier, you guys, I wish I had these kind of classes when I was in high school. Oh my gosh. You are so fortunate to have these instructors. I know they probably drive you crazy, but you are so fortunate to have them sharing these ideas with you and sharing the joy of music, singing, playing, and thinking about, just doing some critical thinking about what impact it has on your lives and on our society and on our history. I love it, man. I'm jealous. So you guys go do it. Go play some music.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, our students, Vicki Peterson, Cowsill, we appreciate your time. Thank you for what you've done for music. Thank you for being with us. And I'm hoping that maybe when the normalcy comes back, we can have the students interact with you.
I would love that. I would really love that. Let's do that.
Thank you very much.